Hill training.
We are starting in Joshua chapter 11, verse 15. Good morning.
You might know that we are recording class sessions, is that right? Do you want to do it? Do you about that or?
No.
We're using all of our sweet equipment from the Radix grant. What? We're using our sweet equipment from the Radix grant.
Yeah, we're starting on 16. Six must have finished on 15.
That's just one sentence.
But I remember when we mentioned
Moses as the promises.
All right.
No,
These are just.
no, actually set that there in case you
Which,
need.
interestingly, for the first time, I realized something that I think is pretty fun. So, the second to last aisle at the very end is where all the Bibles are. The third to last aisle at the very end, literally sharing the same physical structure just on the other side, is all of the sex books.
I'm sorry, this is the beginning of this. Where is this? Here?
But here, there's all of the Bibles and all of the sex books. They're not on the same aisle, but they share the same frame. It's just one's on one side and one's on the other side.
I wonder if they realize that.
I know. I just picture someone organizing the library and thinking, "Oh man, this will be great."
Well, I can see some with there. Some are thinking, okay, Song of Songs here,
Right.
context here.
choices have consequences.
And that was just recorded.
Let's see. Jacob, you ready to roll? How about you take us away at 16?
Okay. Joshua conquered the whole of this region, the hill country of Judah, the Negev, the whole land of Goshen, the Shephelah, the Arabah, and the hill country and coastal plain of Israel. Everything from Mount Halak, which ascends to Seir, all the way to Baal Gad in the valley of the Lebanon, at the foot of Mount Hermon. And he captured all the kings there and executed them. Joshua waged war with all those kings over a long period. Apart from the Hivites who dwelt in Gibeon, not a single city made terms with the Israelites. All were taken in battle. For it was the Lord's doing to stiffen their hearts to give battle to Israel in order that they might be proscribed without quarter and wiped out, as the Lord had commanded Moses.
Okay, so another tie-in with Moses. We're trying to get in with the promise of the land that we received.
Right.
The Anchor Bible labels that section a complete success, and the next section it labels a partial success. Jacob, please continue.
Okay. At that time, Joshua went and wiped out the Anakites from the hill country, from Hebron, Debir, and Anab, and from the entire hill country of Judah. and from the entire hill country of Israel. Joshua proscribed them in their towns. No Anakites remained in the land of Israel, but some remained in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. Thus Joshua conquered the whole country, just as the Lord had promised Moses, and Joshua assigned it to Israel to share according to the tribal divisions, and the land had rest from war.
Okay, so we have this complete success story for the southern part of Judah and the sort of middle part of Israel, and then we had this partial success in what basically is the Gaza Strip. Ashdod is more or less in the Gaza Strip. I actually got a chance to visit there.
Well, it's north.
I can't remember if it's barely north or barely south, but it's more or less
It's north or south is Egypt.
on record. And so now we have an end of hostility, so we must be done with the book of Joshua, right?
No, because it's not done until there's a
Every town
list.
did
There's
a
one.
king, apparently.
Every town had a ruler. Every town had a central ruler.
Mhm.
And, you know, whenever it says town, that really means a fairly significant geographic area, because you would have the city and its daughters. It's one note the Bible actually calls it its daughters. So you'd have a city and then just a large gathering of villages and, very small farming communities. Not even suburbs, because they were all related to work in a way that suburbs aren't.
Well, throughout the world, this is the case when the entire economy was basically subsistence agriculture with a little bit more, then you had to have the people on the land, and a little bit more was for the leadership and a few mercenary soldiers. And so you had to defend them, so you had a king or whatever, a lord. And this was true throughout the world, including China. This is the way, when you have that primitive agriculture, that's the way you organize.
All right, let's keep going with chapter 12. Jacob, you want to continue?
Okay. The following are the local kings whom the Israelites defeated and whose territories they took possession of. East of the Jordan, from the Wadi Arnon to Mount Hermon, including the east half of the Arabah, King Sihon of the Amorites, who resided in Heshbon and ruled over part of Gilead, from Aror to the bank of the Wadi Arnon and the Wadi proper to the Wadi Jabok and the border of the Ammonites, and over the eastern Arabah up to the Sea of Chinnerate, and the southward by way of Beit Jeshimot, at the foot of the slopes of Pisgah on the east down to the Sea of Arabah, that is, the Dead Sea. Also the territory of King Og of Bashan, one of the last of Raphaim, who resided in Ashtaroth and in Edrei, and ruled over Mount Hermon, Salcah, and all of Bashan up to the border of the Geshurites and the Maacathites, and also over part of Gilead, down to the border of King Sihon of Heshbon. These were vanquished by Moses, the servant of the Lord, and the Israelites, and Moses, the servant of the Lord, assigned that territory as a possession to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. And the following are the local kings whom Joshua and the Israelites defeated on the west side of the Jordan, from Baal-Gad to the valley of the Lebanon to Mount Halak, which ascends to Seir, which Joshua assigned as a possession to the tribal division of Israel in the hill country, in the lowlands, in the Arabah, in the slopes, in the wilderness, and in the Negev, and in the land of the Hittites, the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. They were.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right now. So everyone sort of look at your text, because it should have some interesting way of showing all of these kings, right? And then they add them all up to the bottom, and there are a total of
31.
31 kings.
If they're all unitary, that means there are 31 individuals.
So, this section in chapter 12 is very similar to other conquest write-ups that were done. The Egyptians did it, the Assyrians did it. They would literally just list their military conquests in a formalized manner. And for the Assyrians, they wrote these in Akkadian, which was not the language they spoke. They spoke Aramaic. So anything they wrote in Akkadian, they were writing to show their gods that, what their records were and what they were doing. So they were writing up to show their gods how magnificent they were about these conquests, and they would write them in tablets, and they would write them on walls with great pictures carved into the walls. The oldest archaeological use of relating Jews to King David is in, I can't remember which people, I want to say it was maybe Assyrian, but it was basically, there's, a Mesopotamian tablet written by some superpower that said, and then we whooped up on the people of King David. And that's actually, for our own people's records, the first time our people comes up in terms of David is in one of these types of things, but written by the people who beat us. Unlike this one, which is, right? and they're not necessarily accurate, right? The winner gets to write history kind of thing. That was even more true for these, because you wanted to show in as grand a way as possible just how complete or how savage or how utterly destructive your conquest was. So it's not a particularly engaging type of narrative to read. There's not a lot of plot twists in chapter 12, right? But this is a type of literature that existed a long time ago. So.
I have a question about the Hebrew, because it says, did they not have the fake numbers where they use letters as numbers? That's all I've had.
Well, they didn't have the Hindi numbers as the arrows.
But no, did they have these fake numbers where they're just...
No, I know what you mean. You mean gematria. I don't know how early gematria started to be used, to be honest, but it's a pretty simple system, right? The first 10 letters are 1 through 10, the next 10 are 10 through 20, and then the next one are 1, 2, and 300. So it's not like it's totally complicated, and I know it was for sure used in the rabbinic period, but that's a pretty, I'm gonna write that down.
But here, they evidently added up by hand.
Because
It's
English-
Kol Malachim Shloshim Ve'echad. So they came up with the same numbers today.
Because usually in the Bible, it's, Arba'im Anashim, or, Arba Me'od Anashim, one's a
I mean,
word.
that's good,
It's
right?
usually-
Because you should write out your numbers. Because in English, it's really presented as like someone's personal tally code.
Mhm.
So I was wondering if it can...
Well, this is a tally code too, of sorts.
I very seldom write out the word when I'm doing arithmetic. Never, but seldom.
Candace, let's continue with 13.
We're not going to read the names of all the kids.
No, we're not.
Thank you.
They're listed by city. If you want to go memorize them at home on your own time later, you will more than welcome.
Joshua was now old, advanced in years. The Lord said to him, "You have grown old, you are advanced in years, and very much of the land still remains to be taken possession of.
Oh, wait, I thought we conquered it again. Okay, keep going.
This is the territory that remains, all the districts of the Philistines and all those of the Geshurites from the Shihor, which is close to Egypt, to the territory of Ekron on the north, are accounted Canaanite, namely those of the 5 lords of the Philistines, the Gazites, the Ashdodites, the Ashkelonites, the Gittites, and the Ekronites, and those of the Avim on the south. Further, all the Canaanite country from Mirah of the Sidonians to Aphek at the Amorite border, and the land of the Gebalites with the whole valley of the Lebanon from Baal Gad at the foot of Mount Hermon to Lebo Hamath on the east. with all the inhabitants of the hill country from the valley of the Lebanon to Mishrapoth-Maim, namely all the Sidonians. I myself will dispossess those nations for the Israelites. You have only to apportion their lands by lot among Israel, as I have commanded you.
Okay, I'm going to pause you for a second, Candace. So there are a couple of interesting things here. The first one is talking about the Philistines. Right, the Philistines are who Saul fights and who Solomon fights and who David fights.
Right.
And Samson. Right. So the Philistines, even when we did Judges, if you think back, the Philistines were not the primary guys who were beating in Judges, but they came up every now and then. This is really the only section that I just did a quick recording search on my computer, and this is the only time in Joshua that it really comes up. It does not come up again in the rest of Joshua. So the Philistines, remember, are these sea people that sort of get kicked out by the people who become the Greeks, and then they make their way across the Mediterranean, and then they sort of land in the Gaza Strip area, and they set up major coastal cities in the Gaza Strip. And there's part of the whole fascination with Israel outside of communities who are like Jewish communities and Islamic communities, and aside from the real on-the-ground interest, both political and religious, the greater sort of world fascination is, this is like, Book of Kings Part 2. We're still fighting the Philistines in the land of Israel. And Thomas Friedman talks about this a little bit towards the end of From Beirut to Jerusalem, actually. He talks about, he has a chapter about why are international communities so excited about what happens in Israel as far as conflict in ways that they aren't excited about what happens in other parts of the world based on conflict. And one of the things he points to is that, even the geography lines up, not that it's the same people at all. I mean, remember, this was a re-immigration of Jews, and this was, sort of, these Islamic communities that were left out when the Ottoman Empire was destroyed and then redivvied up. So it's not the same people at all, but it's in the same geographic locations. I mean, it's the Gaza Strip, and you've got this sort of, the coastal plains area, and so it's a big fascination thing. The other one is that the last thing that you just read, Candace, simply allotted to Israel, and exactly as I commanded you. In other words, this is God saying, I'm going to take care of everything. In fact, the only work you have to do is decide who's going to move where once I've kicked everybody out. Right? Which, again...
It's not simple.
It's true. It's true.
And some of those Philistines came from Nineveh, which is also a Greek island, but it was destroyed by a volcano.
But that's biblically satisfying, because theoretically, when we keep fighting them and keep fighting them, even though we have wiped all of them out of the territory of Israel, they could just be sending more from their predecessors.
Well, except for all of these other, let's see, the Canaanites and the Ashdodites and the Ashkelonites.
Well, yeah, I don't have an answer for that. But the Philistines are very nicely in according to biblical correctness.
So here we are. God has promised us again that He's going to take care of everything. That God will take care of everything. And as we know, there's still half a book of Joshua left, right? So unless they take a long time divvying up the land, there's going to be more to this than it seems. And then we have the entirety of the book of Judges.
When they say close to Egypt, were they considering the Sinai is Egypt? Or all the way to the river?
It would depend on what period it's in, because at certain periods, Egypt went halfway up into Israel, actually. But probably the Sinai counts. Candace, why don't you keep going?
Therefore, divide this territory into hereditary portions for the 9 tribes and the half-tribe of Manasseh. Now the Reubenites and the Gadites, along with the other half-tribe, had already received the shares which Moses assigned them on the east side of the Jordan, as assigned to them by Moses, the servant of the Lord. From Aroer on the edge of the Wadi Arnon and the town in the middle of the wadi, the entire tableland from Medeba to Dibon, embracing all the towns of King Sihon of the Amorites, who had reigned in Heshbon up to the border of the Ammonites. Further, Gilead, the territories of the Geshurites and the Maacathites, and all of Mount Hermon, and the whole of Bashan up to Salcah. The entire kingdom of Og, who had reigned over Bashan at Ashtaroth and at Edrei. He was the last of the remaining Rephaim. These were defeated and dispossessed by Moses, but the Israelites failed to dispossess the Geshurites and the Maacathites, and Geshur and Maacah remain among Israel to this day. No hereditary portion, however, was assigned to the tribe of Levi, their portion being the fire offerings of the Lord, the God of Israel, as he spoke concerning them. And so Moses assigned the following to the tribe of the Reubenites for their various clans, and it became theirs: the territory from Aroer on the edge of the Wadi Arnon, and the town in the middle of the wadi up to Medeba, the entire tableland, Heshbon and all its towns in the tableland, Dibon, Baal, Beth, Baal, Meon.
You could actually skip down
Okay.
to verse, the middle of verse 21. The Midianite chieftains, start there. And you don't even need to read their names.
I'm trying to find it.
Moses defeated him and the Midianite chiefs.
Yeah.
21?
Then go down to the parentheses.
Oh, for Moses defeated him and the Midianite chiefs of Evi, Rechan, Zurahur, and Reba, who had dwelt in the land as princes of Sihon. Together with the others that they slew, the Israelites put Balaam, son of Beor, the augur, to the sword. The boundary of the Reubenites was the edge of the Jordan. That was the portion of the Reubenites for their various clans, those towns with their villages.
All right, so let me sort of do this a different way. So the next section, starting in 24, is the territory of Gad. And you get all of the landmarks and all of the people who used to be there. And it is interesting that the way you figure the landmarks is based on the previous people. Whether or not they have already been evicted, or whether they're still there a little bit, or whatever, those are the landmarkers that they're using in the text to define where is Gad and where is Reuben. So Gad goes all the way through verse 28. This is the territory of Gad for their clans, the towns with their fenced areas. And then in 29 we get eastern Manasseh, and that goes through 32. These are what Moses gave him fight beyond the Jordan and the plains of Moab east of Jericho. And then we again get, but to the Levite tribe Moses gave no territory. Adonai, God of Israel, is himself their territory as God promised them. So that lines up in exactly the same thing as verse 14. Only the Levites did not get a territory, although there's a slightly different wording. And one is that Adonai directly is their territory, and then over here, offerings by fire to Adonai are the Levites' territory. So the Torah already sets up the Levites as a mobile priestly class that is not tied by land. They have a different type of economic and hereditary property system than the rest of the clans, which we've talked about a few times, and how all of the laws about marriage and the status of an almanah, and the reason that if your husband dies, you then marry their next youngest brother. These are all concerned about keeping the land inside the family units, inside the clan units, inside the tribal units. And the Levites were sort of outside of that. Were sort of outside of that system.
Do you own property?
Do I own property? I rent property in an apartment.
And
I don't own any property.
you
Actually, before we move on, one quick question.
Yeah.
When they talk about Og, king of Bashan, they keep emphasizing him being the last of the Rephaim. And I know that means ghosts, or essentially people that have been wiped out. But they keep emphasizing that every time they mention him. Is there a relevance to that, or an importance of the time it was written?
What verse? Let's see.
I was going to say it should be in verse 12 of chapter 13. And then the time they mentioned him before.
Og and
Yeah.
Bashan.
Because when they mention him in verse 4 of chapter 12, and when they mention him in verse 12 of chapter 13, they emphasize both times that he was one of the last and then the last of the Rephaim. And being that the only other time they refer to was Abraham fighting against them way, way back in Genesis. Yeah, I mean, they were a tribe that Israel never fought with. They were extinct by that time. But is there a reason they emphasized he was one of them?
I don't.
The Rephaim, the giants, from chapter 6, I believe, of Genesis, where
No.
the
Nephilim
fallen
means,
angels,
Yeah, I think you mean Nephilim.
Nephilim means giants, and Rephaim literally means ghosts. Those touched by the shadow of death.
Ah, okay. Rephaim. See notes on 12:4. So let me go find that.
Zombies.
No, we don't get zombie apocalypse until Daniel. And all of the.
Abraham fought off the first zombies.
was it the light and his brothers of that clan?
Those were the Anakim.
Okay, here we go. Rephaim. This is. Oh, you didn't bring your.
Yeah, I
You
thought
did? So it's on 325. The word is best explained as referring originally to an aristocracy of professional chariot warriors, from whose ranks also came many of the Canaanite kings. The root. So they're basing this off of some Ugaritic texts that have the same root, which is interesting because in modern Hebrew, Rephaim does mean ghosts. A secondary meaning in Hebrew as giants, and they cite some verses in Deuteronomy for that, and they're tying that in as, when you think of the large chariots, that's where they think the connection with its use as giants in Deuteronomy. In Isaiah and Psalms and Job, you get this sort of shades of the dead ghosts meaning. According to Deuteronomy 3:11, Og required an exceptionally large bed.
Like Lincoln.
Would you say like Lincoln?
Yeah.
So there you go. If anything, I hope that gave you even more questions
Well,
about this.
It is because it makes me try to think, are they emphasizing that because they were trying to say that Og is the last guy who is so powerful they attribute supernatural power to him, or the last pseudo-god emperor of any regional tribe or anything, and they want to emphasize that to say, yeah, we brought down, for lack of a polite word, the last badass in the region?
I mean, it might be that. It might be that that Og is, what a great name, right? I mean, don't you picture this huge guy
Yeah.
with like a big axe or something like that?
I've been thinking, the whole time we've been reading this, the names and Og, I have this feeling that we're reading a prequel to Star Wars.
Well, Lucas admitted he took Anakin from Anakin. He publicly admitted that in an interview in the 80s.
Oh, okay, I didn't realize that.
So, another thing I want to point out in this section is that we literally just had God explain how God would wipe out everyone, and all we would need to do is assign the land.
That misses a lot.
But then, when Israel did not evict the Gerushites or the Maccathites, and there lives a king of the Gerushites and the Maccathites in Israel to this day. The origin of this book, the author of this book, whatever that means, had no problem writing those sentences one chapter apart. So I think it would be incorrect to think that they missed it. Oh, I didn't realize that I wrote in chapter 12 that God was going to clear everybody out, and in chapter 13 that God had not cleared everyone out, even to this day right now. Right? And references to right now are always interesting and sort of questionable in the Bible because it's hard to tell when that means and what that means about the origins of the text. Was that sentence was that until right now added later or not, or was it always there or whatever? But the point is that they're both here in the book, and, from whatever process it took to the final edition that we have right now, people were okay leaving it.
Well, I think the reason they left it, you mentioned that the other people wrote in a separate language. Well, I think that when the scribe wrote this down, it was successfully written. It was something that was readable by God. You didn't touch it to that. So that's why they left them, because they were sacred.
So that could have been a separate
Yeah.
thing
Yeah.
incorporated into this.
Yeah, they wouldn't amend the holy text if they'd add a sentence later on verifying this is kind of how the situation actually is versus what the sacred text.
Or if this was some kind of a collection of the conquest accounts,
Yeah.
then you're not going to necessarily change the manuscripts that you're using, you're just going to copy them exactly.
Right.
Or, ideologically, for the ideology of this book, it doesn't actually matter. In other words, it doesn't have to, the ideology was what it was, whether or not reality matched. I mean, that's not exactly gone from religion nowadays, and Judaism more of a religion. I mean, we have ways of making the idealistic ideology okay to work with a world that doesn't necessarily, or a reality that doesn't necessarily match. I mean, that's sort of almost a hallmark of religion, I think. So there's a lot of ways it could be there. I like the manuscript idea. I think that it was simply there because it doesn't have to match the ideology. This is what God promised, and this is the promise that we're going to keep alive in our tradition. That could have been reason enough to keep it, despite if there were still, one group living in such and such a place.
And it couldn't be like, I feel like there's too many of both options, success and the success minus those two guys that are still wandering around. Because they couldn't be out of order, they didn't have, like, if you're inviting her, this isn't David.
Yeah.
So could this one have come after God personally defeated everything in the land? Or before it, rather? Could these potential individual manuscripts be out of order?
Yeah, probably, but I mean, whenever, I know I'm the one who brought it up, right? But, when there are no manuscripts, when we talk about manuscripts, we just always have to be very careful, not to get too crazy with it.
Or stories or whatever?
While we're doing the book of Joshua, didn't you say that there was these scripture which got then some commentaries were added afterwards? Can't remember, it started with the R. About the can't remember the exact words it was used, but basically it was explained that it was a commentary within which was added at a later date. Redaction.
Redaction? Was it in Joshua or Judges?
It was Judges, yeah, Judges.
Judges. Trying to remember. Judges is, in a way that Joshua is not, has the distinct stories of Judges are even more discrete. They have a beginning and a middle and an end, and they're even marked by a pattern. The stories are set up in a pattern, so it's like, that current, judge dies, and then Israel goes wayward, and then there was, turmoil for a certain amount of time, and then someone rises up and is identified either before or after by God as the next main person. There's some story about that person. They are solidified in power. They ruled for X number of years peacefully. Then they die. Then Israel becomes wayward. And so, it's just so beautifully organized that it cannot be accidental. It's just the text. It's just so well put together.
So is that only unique to the book of Judges?
Yeah, that pattern is unique to the book of Judges, but each book has its own pattern, you know, I mean, it's not, I mean, does anyone feel like there's been a clear pattern in Joshua? Because
No, it's just all over the place. I mean, I keep thinking, am I missing something?
Right.
And I realize what's not there.
I mean, there are a bunch of battles, kind of.
Yeah, but, I mean, time-wise, and I don't know.
But I mean, it's so it started with with, you know, just came into the land, then there's this huge Jericho story, and then there are a couple other conquest stories of specific cities and specific groups. Then there was, I think it was Anne who read it either last time, or I think it was last time, where there were a bunch of different cities that were attacked, but each one only got like 3 or 4 verses, and Anne read like, you know, a dozen or something different groups getting destroyed, all in the space of like a chapter. And now what we've been doing today has sort of been like, okay, let's sort of recap everything that we did. And so it does progress along, but it is not totally, I don't want to say it's not organized, but it does not have that rhythmic pattern.
It sort of limps along.
Well, it's a limping but linear pattern. You begin with a very detailed, lengthy narrative, then you come
We're gonna
to
pass
these
this
guys
around.
were also semi-important to
The maps,
checklists.
everything. So I'm passing around the Anchor Bible as we keep going, which has a map of Israel.
Of everything that's being talked about.
Right, it basically has the Joshua tribal territories labeled. So while we do that, let's continue in 14. Phil, if you want to go for it.
And these are the allotments of the Israelites in the land of Canaan. They were apportioned to them by the priest Eleazar, by Joshua son of Nun, and by the heads of the ancestral houses of the Israelite tribes, the portions that fell to them by lot, as the Lord had commanded through Moses for the 9.5 tribes. For the portion of the other 2.5 tribes had been assigned to them by Moses on the other side of the Jordan. He had not assigned any portion among them to the Levites, for whereas the descendants of Joseph constituted 2 tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim, the Levites were assigned no share in the land, but only some towns to live in with the pastures for their livestock and cattle. Just as the Lord had commanded Moses, so the Israelites did when they apportioned the land.
Okay, so again, it's very clear that tribal territories are mandated by Adonai through Moses. It goes all the way back. We are, you could say that however the tribes actually ended up where they were. There's all kinds of theories about this. But however it happened, what is very clear is that in our tradition, the tribal territories are retrojected to have been given by God to Moses. And so, they are among the most sacrosanct things, therefore, because this was one of the things that in the Bible, this is direct line, Moses, or Adonai, Moses, Joshua, and Joshua set everybody up. So, regardless, there is not a real preserved record in our own tradition or our own text about what actually happened, how certain tribes ended up where, and where certain tribes came from. But once we have a organized Israelite people, the tribes are already retrojected into being, just a sacred subject that was given by God through Moses that cannot be changed. We're getting it over and over and over again.
Retrojected?
Retrojection. It's actually, it is a word that means taking something from a certain period and through stories or through your literature or whatever, placing it as if it's actually from a much earlier period. The lineage of David, which then becomes the lineage of Jesus, is considered retrojected because David, his lineage is actually counted all the way back And Jesus' lineage is counted all the way back through the Old Testament as well. And or Aaron's lineage, this is an even better one. The high priest lineage that goes back towards Aaron was a retrojection from a time that had a high priesthood, then created a high priest lineage. I mean, there was probably already some sort of a high priest lineage, but it was retrojected back to the first high priest, Aaron, Moses' brother, chosen by God. Let's see what are.
And Aaron was, depending on how you feel about the Bible, were rejected to Moses.
Well, what do you mean?
Oh yeah, Moses, he was his brother. His
Oh,
brother.
right.
We never talked about him before, but I got you this.
So, does that explain it? And this is, the tribal thing is actually, I think, a great example. I mean, in our text, the origins of the tribes is assigned to God giving it to Moses. And that's where they came from. And because that is so strong a tradition, boy, would not archaeologists love to dig up some record that says, and the Danites, came out from Egypt and then ran into the Judites who'd broken off from the Canaanites. Boy, we would love some kind of information like that. But the history of our people was retrojected into our sort of, ancestral stories that bind us, that initially bound us and still bind us together as one singular Israelite people.
I just have to remind myself to suspend any sense of time and put this together, because then I just make myself very confused. So
Yeah.
because there's no real linear time in here in some respects.
It's not a line that you would recognize.
No.
Or it's a created linear line outside of what,
Yeah.
right? What version were we on, Philip?
6.
6? All right.
The Judites approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, said to him, "You know what instructions the Lord gave at Kadesh Barnea to Moses, the man of God, concerning you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land."
Okay, do we all remember the story? Anybody want to recap the spy story real quick?
So Moses sends 12 spies
Yeah.
into the land and says, hey, go check out this place we're about to take over. And they're like, okay. And then they all come back and they're like, everyone there's a giant, we are like grasshoppers to them. They're just going to squash us. What were we thinking? We should go back to Egypt. Except Joshua and some other guy come back and they're like, God, they're big. But God's bigger, right? Let's just do this. There's sweet fruit there.
Right. So Caleb, exactly, beautifully said. Caleb and Joshua are the two spies that come back that are quaking in their boots, and they both say, wow, this land looks great. There's all kinds of great milk and honey and stuff in here, so I can't wait to go conquer it. But everybody else was really scared, and this was the reason that we had to wander in the desert for 40 years to kill off the generation of slaves, because Moses and Adonai realized that Caleb and Joshua were exceptions, that as a people they were too ingrained into a slavery mindset to go in and actually have land and lives of their own. So if it wasn't for the spy story, there basically would be no need for the rest of the book of Numbers, because then we wouldn't have spent 40 years wandering around in the desert. We would have just gone straight to the speech in Deuteronomy and then gone into the land.
So Joshua was 40 years old when he was a spy. Then they did 40 years, so he was 80.
Yeah, well, we already know that Joshua was ripe in age. You weren't listening to Candace when she read. All right. Let's keep
Trusting God is everything, right?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I gave him a forthright report, while my companions who went up with me took the heart out of the people. I was loyal to the Lord my God. On that day, Moses promised an oath. The land on which your foot trod shall be a portion for you and your descendants forever, because you were loyal to the Lord my God. Now the Lord has preserved me as he promised. It is 45 years since the Lord made me this promise to Moses, when Israel was journeying through the wilderness, and here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as on the day that Moses sent me. My strength is the same now as it was then, for battle and for activity. So assign to me this hill country as the Lord promised on that day. Though you too heard on that day that Anakites are there in great fortified cities, if only the Lord is with me, I will dispossess them as the Lord promised. So Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and assigned Hebron to him as his portion. Thus Hebron became the portion of Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, as it still is, because he was loyal to the Lord, the God of Israel. The name of Hebron was formerly Kiriath Arba. Arba was the great man among the Anakites, and the land had rest from war.
Okay,
I like that little note of like the previous culture's history.
yeah. So the land of rest from war, we've now had that a few times, and it's, I think the sense I'm getting, and one of what other people think, is that this is not the whole land got rest from war. It's the land that we were just talking about, only that area had rest from war. So one by one, maybe we're sort of like polishing off, okay, now we're settled. Okay, now we're settled over here, and we're sort of like area by area going through this. Isn't it great when the Bible wraps up its own loose ends? It's pretty wonderful.
I'm always excited when their math is right. I don't know why I get so nervous. I was like, okay, 40, 45, let's do this. And then he was like 85, and I was like, yes. I don't know why my faith in their ability to add is so little.
Well, there are some really,
It's like, is
Right.
this gonna add up? That's what I was saying before in terms of time. It bothers me when I can't put the parts together because they don't make sense.
well, it does add up. That's why we know that the Earth
That's
is
still-
5,000,
that's a lot of
700 and
work
whatever
for
years old.
And this one also does drop some timeline, because if you say I'm 85 now, it's
Right.
45 years ago that Moses did, so you
Yeah.
know that this is maybe like the 5th year of their conquest, and they've come this far when this conversation occurs.
Oh, well, so if you really like the Bible maps, there are great rabbinic texts and then on and on and on stuff about this, because people love to figure out the chronology, the meta-chronology of the Bible. But since the meta-chronology of the Bible is not that well done, what it involves is taking all these individual stories and the ages of people and lining them up and making these like complex, like multi-charts of like when people were born and died and how many years and everything else. But you can actually sort of make it work and go all the way back.
I feel like
Doesn't
Joshua
always
was
work.
cheating. Because Joshua was conceived during Exodus, apparently, because he was 40 when Moses did the thing when they crossed the Jordan.
He still remembered Egypt.
But
Yeah, when he was a teenager.
Did you watch the movie?
Yeah, he would have been probably like 16 or so when they left Egypt or somewhere in that neighborhood.
But, which movie? The Ten Commandments?
Yeah.
Oh. We'll watch that one.
Well, that was the blessing he got for trusting God, that extra surge of health at that age. When you trust God, there's blessing
Yeah.
that comes with it.
85 years old, as strong as he was when he was 40.
That's
Good thing he didn't get injured in any of those battles.
I know. So the next section I am going to just sort of overview, because reading through it I don't think will be a great use of our time.
what does Kiriath mean? It seems to be a prefix of a lot of
Yeah,
times in Israel.
like there's Kiriath this and Kiriath that. I've never really thought about what it actually means. What verse is that?
Well,
15.
Yeah, 14, 15.
but there are other curiosities.
I'm going to bet it means something like dominion or domain of.
Let's see. 15. Oh, that's great. It's translated as Kiriath. How wonderful. Let's see if we actually let me do this. is not the right word. It's showing me.
I often wonder about that.
I just accepted it in the simple way that I accepted that Noah both sent out a dove and a raven. I was like, oh, whatever. You know, I'm not racist. I don't care what color the bird was.
Yeah, I don't know.
Raven was more street
All
smart.
right, that's another question to write down. What is the deal with the Kiryat attachments? Okay. I'll quickly get back to everybody on that. So 15, is 15 in with verse 12? Yeah, so this is for 1 through 12 and 15. This is the allotment of the tribe of Judah, right, which is this huge southern tribe. And for their clans, extended to the border of Edom, the southern wilderness is in being the southern limit. So the southern border was, see details from verse 2 through 4. The eastern boundary was the whole of the Salt Sea, the Yamamela, which is the Dead Sea. And as far as the mouth of the Jordan, so that's a pretty big, what's that map? That is a big chunk.
Yeah, Judah was very big.
I have one
Yes.
question. I've never been to Israel, so I can't really, I know it's small. I'm trying to picture how
You
big
fit like-
it is.
How many Israels did you fit in the Upper Peninsula? Two.
Okay.
It's a little
So the-
smaller than Lake Michigan.
These tribal portions are like county size for us almost.
Probably. Maybe even a little smaller.
Was there anything in here that provided for expansion? In other words, you know, this is their tribal inheritance and everybody is supposed to have a piece of the land. So what happens when you have children and grandchildren
We're
and
supposed
children
to
and
number, we're supposed
children?
to number the stars in the
Did,
grain of
did
sand.
did they think about that?
That is a great question.
Also, population didn't increase very much in those days.
What God promises.
Well, here's what's interesting about the question, right? Is because what you're asking about is where is the process
Yeah,
in this
did
story?
they provide for
Where is the
that?
process? And the absence of process in the Bible is often one of the big things that sort of should lead us to the right questions. For example, where is the process in all of the priestly laws in the book of Leviticus? I mean, did we really go from, inventing a brand new religion and then having a fully established ritual for a high temple cult system? Pretty unlikely. There was probably a process to get there, but we're presented with the final result. There was some kind of a process to get the tribes, the number of tribes, the location of the tribes, and the size of the tribes. And it has to do with this huge gap of information in the archaeological knowledge of how the Israelites formed into a cohesive group. I mean, we just do not know where each tribe came from, if certain tribes broke off from other tribes, which tribes came from different groups that were already there, or were they immigrant groups? I mean, it leads to all of these questions that there's not enough information for them to answer. But yeah, I mean, that is a spot-on observation, because in Joshua, it's finished product. It's as if we already knew how much land each tribe's population was willing to live in, right? Which is weird, because then you think, well, what happens if that tribe suddenly got so much bigger? But we are dealing with the prescriptions for the final product. Is what these borders are for.
And population didn't increase very much in those days. It was pretty good if a child lived to the age of 8. He died. Many of them died before 1. So you had some growth, but it was very small.
Yeah. I mean, in an era that's essentially pre-medical technology, you're talking about up to, in some areas, a 70% infant mortality rate, and plus a life expectancy of like 31 being pretty epic on average.
Yeah,
You guys living to 85, as
Yeah.
strong as.
Oh, strong as a bull, still had all the teeth.
Why do you think they let the guy who lived to be 85 leave it?
So, continuing on, then we have the northern boundary, with lots of details because there was a pretty wide northern boundary. And then the western boundary is the Great Sea, which is of course the Mediterranean. And that was the boundary of the name Judah all around for their clans. So there's a great map on page 364 that shows just Judah, which is huge compared to the other tribes. I mean, it's just
Well, it
really
eventually
big.
becomes the southern kingdom.
Yes, right. So you have basically one tribe, more or less, becomes the entire southern
And the
kingdom.
Benjaminites.
And the Benjaminites.
Yeah, they went in the southern
I
tribe.
like up here. Just that little nugget up in the corner.
Right. So let us continue on. Here we go. All right. What do you want to read first?
Which one?
Where you at?
15:13.
15.
Joshua 15:13.
In accordance with the Lord's command to Joshua, Caleb, son of Jephunneh, was given a portion among the Judites, namely Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron. Arba was the father of Anak. Caleb dislodged from there the 3 Anakites, Shishai, Ahiman, and Talmai, descendants of Anak. From there, he marched against the inhabitants of Debir. The name of Debir was formerly Kiriath Sefer. And Caleb announced, I will give my daughter Aksah in marriage to the man who attacks and captures Kiriath Sefer. His kinsman, Othniel, the Kenizzite, captured it, and Caleb gave him his daughter Aksah in marriage. When she came to him, she induced him to ask her father for some property. She dismounted from her donkey, and Caleb asked her, what is the matter? She replied, give me a present, for you have given me away to Negev land, so give me springs of water. And he gave her upper and lower Guluth. This was the portion of the tribe of the Judites.
All right, so let's stop there. Anybody want to, take a stab at this story here? So we got Caleb's brother marries Caleb's daughter, right? No problems there, okay? So, no. So seriously, what do people think about this? It's just this really quick story. Then we go back to borders of towns in Judah. And we already had Caleb's full story, so this is about Caleb's daughter and Caleb's brother, so someone very close to Caleb. And I mean, what are the possibilities for preserving this story? This northern girl gets married off to some guy who's going to go live in the south, and she's worried that she's not going to have any water, so her father gives her wells, but what good are wells in her father's territory going to do her when she marries Caleb's brother in the south?
I'm getting the sense the story was preserved to explain why they're At some point, there was a land dispute, I mean, in a sense, and there needed to be a reason to explain why there's an unusual division of land in that area. And so his third would be there to explain why there was a division of land that doesn't seem to go with the rest of it. That's the best sense I get. This is like at some point after the text was written, there's some kind of border dispute that people want to know, well, wait, why is this apportioned that way? And so that story is adds to the text as a way that to explain this is what happened, that's why there's an unusual apportionment of land right here.
Okay.
Othniel is described as the kinsman of Caleb, not necessarily his brother.
She's upset. From the way I see it,
Yeah, she's not happy. She does not.
she's
seem-
not moving to the Negev. The way I'm looking at this little footnote is that it said, he gave her away as a dry land, that is, without a dowry.
Yeah.
In other words, maybe she thought, you just gave me away so easily without thinking about it.
Yeah, the JPS has given me away as Negev land.
Yeah.
That you
I
gave me
misread
away.
it. I
Yeah,
misread
you
it.
gave me away
It's
like
not
a patch of
literally.
desert.
I
There's
misread
nothing to bring with it.
Oh, yeah. I
So
totally
she
agree.
wanted some good property in compensation for being given away like that.
Yeah.
Well, in EE note down below says, meaning of Hebrew uncertain, some Greek manuscripts read, he induced her to ask her father for some property. So
He meaning.
the guy she was married to.
Yeah.
Othniel.
Which makes quite a bit of sense in that case.
And that almost would look, I feel like in that time a marriage without a dowry is, I don't know, like some sketchy, like they went and eloped, even though like it's clearly with the blessing of her father. I feel like it legitimizes the wedding or the marriage. That it's just, because the tradition like was that the guy brings
So he gave her
the
that.
land and the girl brings something, or,
And you read, give me a present, but the Hebrews give me a blessing, but the general understanding of what it means in the context is, give me some kind of, something tangible that I can bring to this union, basically.
A question I have, what's the Hebrew meaning for the name Othniel?
It's Othniel.
What's the Hebrew meaning of that name?
Well, he is apparently the first judge in Israel, according to the tradition of Judges chapter 3. It is compounded with the patriarchal deity El. The first element is obscure, but it may be related to the Palmyrene deity, or more generally to Middle Euphrates, counterpart of the Ugaritic root. So they are taking it to other languages' roots, but there doesn't really seem to be clear.
I wondered about that because I know sometimes the meaning of the name can be symbolic as well. I know it's the suffix there. I don't really read that as something
It's
that's opposite to
Othniel.
it.
Othniel.
Yeah.
Othniel. That sounds like a name.
Yeah.
It doesn't have
Right.
a clear root.
No, I mean, he has that, the L is very common
In God.
in Israelite names. Once you get Israelites in other places like Egypt and stuff like that, one of the clear ways you can tell if it's an Israelite or not living here is they'll have this L. They'll have this L as a suffix, yeah.
Generally, whenever I see that suffix gets my attention, that draws me that,
So what is Othniel?
Let's keep going. Let's go ahead to 1520. This is the territory of the Judahites and for their clans. The outmost towns belonging to the Bnei Judah tribe were near the border of Edom. And then we get, starting in 21, lots and lots of cities. So 22, You are welcome to glance at the cities, cities. Now in verse 46, still a bunch of cities.
All the way to 63.
Except it says Gaza.
46, right? So let's from it going westward, all the towns in the vicinity of Ashdod with their villages, Ashdod, its dependencies, and its villages, Gaza, its dependencies, and its villages, all the way to the Wadi Egypt and the edge of the Mediterranean Sea. So this is setting up as in the idealized apportioning of the land, Gaza is part of Judah. However, Gaza, they're already having trouble with. We know that from whatever chapter that was, like 12, that they're having trouble with Gaza. And then the Philistines come, they're going to have big troubles with Gaza. So Gaza is an area that is doesn't look like it's ever fully under Judaic control because they're still having trouble with the people who were there already. And then, before you know it, we're having trouble with the Philistines. And then we get more places, and more places, and then would you pick us up at 63?
But the Judites could not dispossess the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Jerusalem.
Aha.
So the Judites dwell with the Jebusites in Jerusalem to this day. Boy,
Yeah.
So that means they must have been fighting and losing battles, right?
No, they couldn't.
the heart of the land, and we have this problem,
Right.
the serious problem of not being cleansed.
But it makes me think.
It's
of
not
course,
clear.
They're inhabitants, so they had to figure out how to live together and be peaceful.
Well, how many mountains is Jerusalem at this point? It's less than 3.
Oh, this is probably just like City of David
Okay,
stuff. I
just
mean,
all-
that's the oldest part that we have records for, and that's just one of the hills or mountains or whatever you want to call it. And it's not even like a significant part of the old city. It's not even that big.
It's just like
But the City of David, that level of excavation is first temple period. So it's even, significantly before what this is talking about. But there was definitely already, I mean, Jerusalem, it's too good, Jerusalem is like Megiddo. It's one of those places in Israel that it is too good of a spot for there not to have somebody living there pretty much at all times. As soon as somebody leaves, somebody else is going to come in because it's on high ground and it's easily fortified, and there is the Gishon spring is right there next to this easily fortified elevated area. So it's got, and it's near lands that can be agriculturally used. So I mean, it's got basically everything that you need to build a city in the ancient Near East. So there's always been people there, and it's one of it and Megiddo. Those are like the two big places that are often contentious because they're because it's just such a good place to have a city, basically. Like Marquette and all the battles that we suffered through. Yeah, let's keep going with 16.
The portion that fell by lot to the Josephites ran from the Jordan at Jericho, from the waters of Jericho east of the wilderness. From Jericho it ascended through the hill country to Bethel, from Bethel it ran to Luz, and passed on to the territory of the Archites at Ataroth. Descended westward to the territory of the Japhlethites, as far as the border of Lower Beth Horon and Gezer, and ran on to the sea. Thus the Josephites, that is, Manasseh and Ephraim, received their portion.
So Manasseh and Ephraim are often called the half tribes because Joseph is technically one of the 12 sons. So if there's 2 tribes, but they got to be like half tribes. Also, the blessing for sons, the Jewish blessing for sons, it uses Ephraim and Manasseh because
The only sons that don't.
right, any other pair of sons, you wouldn't want to, you're not going to use Cain and Abel, you're not going to use Jacob and Esau. I mean, you're just, not a lot of great options. But Manasseh and Ephraim seem to have gotten along okay. So speaking of that, now the territory of the Ephraimites. And just blow through this.
Territory of Ephraimites by their clans was as follows: boundary of portion of Taradar, to the east after Beth Horon, and boundary ran on to the sea, and the north, and boundary proceeded from someplace in the east to Shiloh, and passed beyond it up to the east of Genoa. From Genoa, descended to Atarosh and to Naarat, touched with Jericho, and ran on to the Jordan. Westward, boundary proceeded from Tapua to the Wadi Canaan, and ran on to the sea. This was the portion of the tribe of the Ephraimites by their clans. Together with the towns marked off for the Ephraimites within the territory of the Manassites, all those towns with their villages. However, they failed to dispossess the Canaanites who dwelt in Gezer, so the Canaanites remained in the midst of Ephraim, as is still the case. But they had to perform forced labor.
Right.
Lovely.
So we made them our slaves.
One generation after we were slaves, we are enslaving other people.
Oh, are you kidding? We weren't even out of Sinai when we were getting laws concerning,
Yeah.
unpaid laborers.
But we called it something else. That makes it okay.
Oh, no. We call
It's the
it
same word.
the same word.
How many tribes are there officially?
Officially 12.
So when you get the master 12 tribe list, does it list Joseph?
No,
It lists Ephraim and Manasseh.
that's half tribes. Those are the two
Okay.
half tribes.
But you can have two tribes there because the Levites don't get any land. So there are 12 land
Levites are some of
spots
them as well.
So
and
there's several
approximately
lists.
13 groups living in them. 14 groups.
I can't even pretend to be good at math, so I'm not even going to say anything. All right, Western Manasseh. 17. Here's the allotment. We get some lineage. Let's start on 17, verse 4.
They appeared before the priest Eleazar, Joshua son of Nun, and the chieftains, saying, "The Lord commanded Moses to grant us a portion among our male kinsmen." So in accordance with the Lord's instructions, they were granted a portion among their father's kinsmen. 10 districts fell to Manasseh, apart from the lands of Gilead and Bashan, which are across the Jordan. So these are on the west side of the Jordan line. Manasseh's daughters inherited a portion in these together with his sons, while the land of Gilead was assigned to the rest of Manasseh's descendants. The boundary of Manasseh ran from Asher
All
to...
right, so that's big. Actually, we should have started at 3. I kind of left out the Zelophehad part of Zelophehad's daughters. So in verse 3, Zelophehad, son of Hefer, son of Gilead, son of, had no sons of his own, but only daughters. The names of his daughters were Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. And so their father dies, and they have no brothers, and their land is going to, or assumably their father dies, right? If their father was still alive, there would not have been an issue. So even though it doesn't say his father died, if their father was still alive, they could just live on their ancestral land, no problem. But what they need is the ability to inherit the land directly. Otherwise, and they give you this long lineage, not by accident, but just to show, this is already like 4-generation family land. So this is not a new family, this is an old Manasseh family that goes all the way back, and this is their land, and it is going to be lost because they only have daughters, and they get permission to own land. Way earlier than women could own land in America, by the way.
See, women just didn't have rights because they weren't smart enough to ask.
I'm just wondering what would have happened if I said that. Versus you being able to say that as a woman.
But no, like even if you go to the thing we just did with the chick who was dowerless, that was hard to say, where she was like, "Hey, go get us some land."
Right.
And like there's not like Moses didn't even put up a big stink. He was just like, "Oh yeah, that makes total sense. Here's some land, ladies."
All right. So we get some more boundaries after that story. Has anyone not heard that story before? That's a pretty.
Which story?
The story of Zelophehad's daughters. Sorry.
No, I
Starting.
haven't heard that before.
So
Or if
that's-
I did, I didn't remember.
Apparently, when they're referred to, they're actually referred to in the male sense throughout the rest of the writings because of this here incident.
Right. So this actually goes back to a story in Numbers. So go to
In
26:33
Numbers?
in Numbers. Yeah. Because this is sort of a rehashing out of something that already happened.
26:33.
I'm sure it is.
So it's the same story, but it's a little different. So
Now Zelophehad, son of Hefer, had no sons, only daughters. The names of Zelophehad, his daughters were Malanoah, Hagla, Milcah, and Tirzah. Those are the clans of Manasseh. Persons enrolled, 52,700.
so
There they are.
there they are right there. This is all part of the accountings. And let me figure out when these daughters come up. So go to 27, the beginning of 27, because this story is also in Numbers, still in Numbers.
27.
Here we go. The daughters of Colin, read 27, because this is a parallel story, but with different characters. It's basically the same story.
Verse 27?
Mhm.
Those are
Or,
the
sorry,
clans.
no. Chapter 27, verse 1, sorry.
Oh, in Numbers?
In Numbers. Numbers 27,
Okay.
verse
The
1.
daughters of Zelophehad
Zelophehad.
of the Manassite family, son of Hefer, son of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, son of Joseph, came forward. The names of the daughters were Malmanoah, Hagla, Milcah, and Tirzah. They stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, the chieftains, and the whole assembly at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and they said, Our father died in the wilderness. He was not one of the faction, Korah's faction, which banded together against the Lord, but died for his own sin, and he has left no sons. Let not our father's name be lost in his clan just because he had no son. Give us a holding among our father's kinsmen. See, they asked. Moses brought their case before the Lord, and the Lord said to Moses, The plea of Zelophehad's daughters is just. You should give them a hereditary holding among their father's kinsmen, transfer their father's shares to them. Keep reading. Further, speak to the Israelite people as follows. If a man dies without leaving a son, you shall transfer his property to his daughter. If he has no daughter, you shall assign his property to his brothers. If he has no brothers, you shall assign his property to his father's brothers. If his father had no brothers, you shall assign his property to the nearest relative in his own clan, and he shall inherit it. This shall be the law of procedure for the Israelites in accordance with the Lord's command to Moses.
Okay, so this is
Pretty clear.
very clear and it's very significant. And it's sort of weird that it comes up in Joshua, but of course in Joshua it can't be with Moses, right? So it's with
Yeah.
Joshua, and that little thing. But it's the exact, I mean, it is the same family, the same daughters, the same father, the same story.
Right.
But what's incredible here is, I mean, this is a pretty unique situation that women are allowed to own ancestral land. And it was not just, in Joshua, it may seem like it was a one-time thing, but in the Numbers story, it is not. In the Numbers story, it is, you know, Moses says this is just, if there's only daughters, why should, you know, an ancestral land, then what would happen is the land would be dispersed amongst his male relatives. So like, you know, if Zelophehad had 3 brothers, they would all get a piece or something like that, or his uncles would get a piece. But instead, you're keeping the entirety of that land intact, and it can actually go towards the daughters. And look who come after the daughters. This is in some ways, I think, the most impressive. The brothers of the father come after the daughters, and the uncles of their grandfather come after the daughters. That is not necessarily what one may have expected in this period and in this tribal land setup. But here it is in Numbers, and this is it's so interesting that, you know, the story is in both places, because what it means to me, I think, is this was the story that was used that became known as the precedent establishing piece. I mean, we can name in our American history those, you know, blank versus blank that established major policy in the United States. And this is like, I think, an example of that, oh, Zelophehad and his daughters, that was the case that established the right of women to own land granted in certain scenarios. And of course, what would have happened is they would marry, right? So those daughters would marry, and they would be marrying men who also owned land. And then the sons of those 4 daughters, some of them would take up the name and land of Zelophehad, and the others would take up the name and land of their father, as opposed to their mother's father. Does that make sense? Because normally the reason why women didn't own land is because you tracked the land through the men. And it wasn't so much about ownership as it was about the name that was attached to it, and it was keeping track of the name. So eventually, men are going to be the ones who are used to track that land, but it'll still be Zelophehad's land, and there's just a gap at some point where it was tracked through women and not men. Yeah.
Because they say the Lord commanded Moses, so they're citing God.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes. Oh,
So
yes.
is that actually true, or is that actually what?
It's in the book.
There
It's
is
got to be
such
true.
a commandment from God that women should have.
In that case.
Yeah, in this case, I mean, this is considered a commandment, and not only that, this case sets up in Numbers 27:8, further speak to the Israelite people as follows: if a man dies without leaving son, etc., etc., etc. I mean, these are God's. This is just as God gives a list of laws concerning other topics. This is God giving a list of laws based on inheritance, and it came up with this case. And the first one is the divinely decreed ordinance that if there are only daughters, then you track the land through them, as opposed to dividing it up to other male families that already have their own land. See, Zelophehad's brother already has his own ancestral land, and so it's only Zelophehad's land that we're concerned with. And so but it's totally considered a divine decree.
I think basically because of Moshe's standing with Hashem, he inquired of Hashem, so therefore Moses' words were considered Hashem's words. Is that true?
Yeah.
Well, it even says God, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, it could not be more explicit here.
Well, ladies, that's a good question. Let me go ask God.
And that also really is what puts the Torah leaps and bounds ahead of any other legal system in the world at that time. I can't think of any other culture that, for that matter, I can't think of any other culture in the world at that time that allowed women to own land property.
It depends on what that time means.
Yeah.
Because,
Assume at the time.
for example, in Egypt, women typically had more rights than other places. And by the time you get to like 400 and 500 BCE, I was just looking at laws, property laws at this island in the middle of the Nile, at the very southern border of Egypt. And women could own property, but it was usually in situations where there wasn't a man owning it. Women could also, and it wasn't just land, but like women could own goods as well, like under their own name, and they could, in some senses, they could sign a contract, but they couldn't serve as a witness to the contract. So they didn't have equal rights, but they had a lot of rights. And this was also weird because since it was on an island, nobody owned land; people owned buildings. But even smaller, it's more. Think more like Manhattan. Nobody owns land in Manhattan. You can own a building, you can own a floor of a building, and you can own individual rooms in a building. And it was exactly like that in this place called Elephantine. So there were all these Jews there, and there was all these contracts, and so you could have one house where the building was owned by family A, but the middle floor was owned by family B, but rooms, 2 and 7 on the 3rd floor were owned by Family City. I mean, so you could get these incredibly complex, like, buildings that were owned partially by various
When you
groups.
think
Or,
about it, that's what condominiums are in homes.
yeah, oh, absolutely.
You own, yeah.
Yeah.
Your unit.
And it's that difference between renting and owning, right, with a condominium, so. All right, let's get back to the text.
Would they have actually had a written title then for owning that land, like the
It-
solar lot?
That is a great question, and I do not know the answer. And there is not, written titles were so common, it's hard to believe that they weren't, but there's no overt evidence to say that there were written land titles for the ancient Israelites.
Because I was thinking, would
Does
it
that
be in
answer your
her
question?
father's name then to?
Right. And it's a good question, because once we have, it's one of those weird chicken and egg things that is like hard to answer. Once you have records, as far as back as we go, and we have written records, ownership transfers are always done with documents. So before that, were they still done with documents? Well, it was always done with documents after that, so it must have been. But at the same time, we haven't found any documents, so it definitely wasn't. So, there's no real way to know. Let's keep going. So now Joshua, this is called Joshua's judge. The name Joseph is going to get their fingers in a twist about something. It's a 1714. Can we keep going?
The Josephites complained to Joshua, saying, "Why have you assigned as our portion a single allotment and a single district, seeing that we are numerous people whom the Lord has blessed so greatly?" "If you are a numerous people," Joshua answered them, "go up to the forest country and clear an area for yourselves there, in the territory of the Perizzites and the Rephaim, seeing that you are cramped in the hill country of Ephraim." "The hill country is not enough for us," the Josephites replied, "and all the Canaanites who live in the valley area have no iron chariots," which is by the Rephaim, "both those in Beth Shean and its dependencies, and those in the valley of Jezreel." But Joshua declared to the house of Joseph, to Ephraim and Manasseh, "You are indeed a numerous people, possessed of great strength. You shall not have one allotment only. The hill country shall be yours as well. True, it is a forest land, but you will clear it and possess it to its furthest limits, and you shall also dispossess the Canaanites, even though they have iron chariots, and even though they are strong."
Okay, so this is a partial answer to your question from earlier, right? Is that what happens if you do feel like you run out of space, or if you feel like you got shorthanded? And here it's you go to the leader, Joshua, and you complain to Joshua, just like you used to complain to Moses, and then Joshua, gives you some sort of a solution. But it's subtly different, I think, from what you were initially describing, because I'm going to sort of re-articulate. You were describing you're settled, and then you grow. But this is, they're already the size they are, and then they were assigned land, and they aren't happy with the amount of land they got for how large they already were. In other words, this is not 20 years went by, and the Josephites had, multiplied exponentially. This was, they moved in, and then they decided that they needed more space.
Well, theoretically, they were like pulling lots for this or something, or like it was some sort of.
Yeah. Well, they're half tribes, but they're not necessarily half the number
Yeah.
of people
Right.
as the other tribes. So, makes sense.
So-
Giving them half territory because their name was half tribe.
Yeah, so basically they saw what everybody else got, and
And then
they
they,
didn't like it.
Right.
So then they went back and complained, and they said, well, look, you did this, this, and this, and we're not happy, so we want what they have. Or more.
all right, let's continue with 18.
The whole community of the Israelite people assembled at Shiloh and set up the tent of meeting there. The land was now under their control, but there remained 7 tribes of the Israelites which had not yet received their portions. So Joshua said to the Israelites, "How long will you be slack about going and taking possession of the land which the Lord, the God of your fathers, has assigned you? Appoint 3 men of each tribe. I will send them out to go to the country and write down a description of it for purposes of apportionment, and then come back to me. They shall divide it into 7 parts. Judah shall remain by its territory in the south, and the house of Joseph shall remain by its territory in the north. When you have written down the description of the land in 7 parts, bring it here to me. Then I will cast lots for you here before the Lord our God. For the Levites have no sharing among you, since the priesthood of the Lord is their portion. And Gad and Reuben, the half-tribe of Manasseh, have received the portions which they were assigned by Moses, the servant of the Lord, on the eastern side of the Jordan. The men set out on their journeys. Joshua ordered the men who were leaving to write down a description of the land. Go, traverse the country and write down a description of it. Then return to me, and I will cast lots for you here at Shiloh before the Lord. So the men went and traversed the land. They described it in a document, town by town, in 7 parts. Then they returned to Joshua and camped at Shiloh. Joshua cast lots for them at Shiloh before the Lord, and there Joshua apportioned the land among the Israelites according to their divisions. The lot for the tribe of the Benjamites, by which their
Okay,
clans.
so before we get into more clan lots and stuff, Candace, you said earlier, well, you know, or I think I'd said something like, you know, God is going to conquer everyone. All you have to do is assign lots. And you pointed out that that was no small feat to organize. And,
And it isn't.
and it isn't.
But I'd like to point out that here they're talking about writing things down.
Yes. Oh, yes.
There's a document somewhere.
There's
Right.
They must have
Documents and
paper, they must have
everything.
paper.
Or-
just for your clarification,
Or,
this was written.
I'm going to argue from a position, you know, playing devil's advocate. If this was written as part of a way to organize our society, which was broken up into parts after the Babylonian exile, then I am writing about a time, you know, 500, 700, 800, maybe, I'm writing about a time that's way far back that no one alive remembers. And so I'm going to assume that they wrote things down the way we
Right.
write it. So that's just the devil's advocate. I mean, I like what you're saying. I'm attracted to that idea myself. But at the same time, there are other scholars who would say, well, they're redacting this in a later period where they would think, of course you would write these things down.
No, that's actually what I was saying.
Oh, really?
They realized retroactively
Right.
what a mess this was, so we better have them write it down.
Right. Otherwise, they'll wonder how we do.
Yes.
Great. All right, John, you want to read more border stuff?
Sure.
This is 1811.
1811. The lot of the tribe of the Benjamites by their clans came out first, the territory which fell to their lot. It lay between the Judites and Josephites. Their boundary on the northern rim began the Jordan. The boundary ascended to the northern flank of Jericho, ascended westward into the hill country, and ran on to the wilderness of Bethaven. From there, the boundary passed southward onto Luz, to the flank of Luz, that is Bethel. And then the boundary ascended to Atroth Adar and to the hill south of Lower Beth Horon. The boundary now turned and curved up the western rim. The boundary ran southward from the hill.
All right, I'm going to stop you. So
That's enough.
we get. So
It sounds like you're giving directions.
we get
to now.
Benjamin. Then, starting in 19, we get Simeon, and they got the second lot, and they were within the fief of Bnei Judah, and then we get what they got, and notably they got Beersheba, which is significant, and then
First have the third lot.
right. So then we go to Zebulun in 10, and we get them, and then we get to Issachar in 1917. They got the fourth lot. They're going down towards the south of the Jezreel Valley. And then we get Asher. We got the fifth lot. And they get stuff in, this is 1924 through 31. That was the tribe of Asher for their clans. And then we get Naphtali. So this, I mean, like, this is totally,
This is supposedly what they're all brought back.
right, this is the result of the reconnoitering, the reports, writing it down, drawing lots, and drawing lots means, you know, asking God more or less. So this is how God has appointed everyone for what land. Okay. So we have Naphtali in 32 through 39. And this is all, I mean, this is, just think about how organized this is. We are presented in Joshua with a group of people that walked in as one massive group of, the first generation of 3 people after having been slaves for many generations, and are now settling according to distinct tribal allegiances in very distinct parts that have very, very specific borders for each place. I mean, these are not like, the Northwest was, so-and-so, and then the Southeast was, I mean, this is very specific.
Except for the tribe of Dan, which moved.
Dan moves. So Dan is in 19. So in 1946, let's start at 40. Start at 47. Yeah, start reading 47. So we're in 1947.
So the territory of the Danites slipped from their grasp. So the Danites made war on Lashem. They captured it and put it to a sword, and they took possession of it and settled in it. And they changed the name of Lashem to Dan after their ancestor, Dan. That was the portion of the tribe of the Danites by their clans, those towns and their villages. When they finished allotting the land by its boundaries, the Israelites gave a portion in their midst to Joshua, son of Nun. At the command of the Lord, they gave him the town he asked for, Timnath-Serah. Timnath-Serah, in the hill country of Ephraim, and he fortified the town and settled in it. These are the portions assigned by lot to the tribes of Israel by the priest Eleazar, Joshua the son of Nun, and the heads of the ancestral houses before the Lord at Shiloh at the entrance of the tent of meeting.
Okay. So, we're done with the borders.
I'm not sure. I feel like we're going to do it at least one more time.
The Anger Bible labels the next part, chapters 20 and 21, as provisions for keeping the peace. And so the first thing that we talk about is asylum towns, which of course asylum towns are listed in the Torah laws, but this is specifically in Joshua. So Douglas, you want to take us up? This is chapter 20, verse 1.
And the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, Assign you the cities of refuge, whereof I have spoken to you by the hand of Moses.
Right. That means that the person who's writing this knows that Moses already gave laws for cities of refuge in the Torah. So if that sentence wasn't there, then it would be like, did they not know that they already got this law? But that sentence is saying, yes, we already know we got these laws. We're just telling you again.
That the manslayer that killeth any person through error and unawareness may flee hither, and they shall be unto you a refuge from the avenger of blood. And he shall flee unto one of those cities, and shall stand in the entrance of the gate of the city, and declare his cause in the ears of the elders of that city, that they shall take him into the city unto them, and give him a place, that he may dwell among them. And if the avenger of blood pursues after him, then they shall not deliver up the manslayer into the hand, because he smote his neighbor unawares, and hated him not before time. And he shall dwell in that city until he stand before the congregation for judgment, until the death of the high priest that shall be in those days. Then may the manslayer return and come into his own city, and into his own house, and into the city from whence he fled. And they set apart Kadesh in Galilee, in the hill country of Naphtali, and Shechem, and the hill country of Ephraim, and Karathaba, the same is Hebron, in the hill country of Judah. And beyond the Jordan at Jericho eastward, they shall assign Bezer, in the wilderness, in the tableland out of the tribe of Reuben, and Ramoth in Gilead, out of the tribe of Gad, and the Golan in Bashan, out of the tribe of Manasseh. These were the appointed cities for all the children of Israel, and for the stranger that sojourneth among them, that whoever killeth any person through error might flee hither and not die by the hand of the avenger of blood until he stood before the congregation.
Are those all in the north except for that one in the east?
I was not paying total attention to actually the geographic locations.
Galilee, maybe you should shift hands.
Ours is down in Judah.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hebron is pretty far south.
Okay.
Hebron is to the south, that was weird.
Maybe people kill people less in the south, I don't know. But, so I guess my first question is, are people familiar with this idea? Has anyone run into this before in
Yeah.
Bible study? So,
Refuge stuff.
yeah, the refuge.
For court.
Right. Well, this is,
Crime.
so this is, I mean, a lot of the Bible seems to be kind of dry emotionally. You know, it does not often talk about feelings in the Bible, how anyone feels about anyone else. It's a lot of actions and a lot of sequences of events. But what is clear is that the range of human emotions is present. It's just they didn't write in a style that overtly addressed them in the characters. But when you get situations like this, you see that, you know, these were very real people with very real passions. And this is about a notion of blood vengeance, basically. You know, if someone killed someone in your family, then you were obligated to go and revenge or avenge that person by killing their killer. And, you know, they use the word hate, and I think they really meant it. I mean, you've got this person who now everyone in his family hates, and he can't live in this community anymore. And instead of letting these people be killed, they had these cities of refuges.
If the killing was accidental.
This is
was
if it was
accidental.
accidental. If it was accidental.
And there was
Not
no,
intentional.
no premeditation.
Right.
Yeah.
No, this is definitely only for accidental killing, but it still takes into account the fact that, I mean, this is not like someone accidentally killed someone. Even in a city the size of Marquette, you could sort of avoid that person and their family. Even in a city, you know, this size. And, you know, think of like Detroit, if you accidentally killed someone in a car crash that was, you know, and let's say it wasn't even like, you know, DUI kind of thing, it was just a total accident and you ran your car into someone and accidentally killed them, you know, you could distance yourself from that family and never run into them. But not in these communities. These were small communities where everybody was going to know everybody. So, yeah, I mean, it was basically you were unsafe. You were unsafe because they were going to. Even if they didn't take blood vengeance, there's no way that they're not going to murder these people. I mean, they hate them. So that's what these cities were for. Any questions or thoughts about it?
So
It's like it's like Munising.
No, in my hometown that happened. Like someone killed someone and it wasn't you. No, he was falling asleep at the wheel. And like, of course, like nobody like tried to kill him. But even like going to the grocery store for like his mom couldn't even go to the grocery store without like,
Small town.
yeah.
Like me to say.
But here it says that, but here it says until the death of the high priest who was in office at that
Not
time.
necessarily the death of the family or the generation of the family that wants to take you out.
Right. What verse is that?
And this is 6:20-26.
Yeah, he shall live in that city until.
And stand trial before the assembly and remain until the death of the high priest who was in office at that time. Thereafter, the manslayer may go back to his home, to his own town, to the town in which he fled.
Well, he may, but I don't know. I wonder if he has to. It doesn't say he has to, but so I would just wonder.
So, you know, it's a sense of taking him into protective custody, like.
Yeah.
the
It's
blood
almost like
avenger-
witness protection or something.
Yeah,
like
well,
that.
yeah, like if you're here in Marquette, the blood avenger's coming after and has done something intentionally, then maybe you could go into the witness protection program or something.
And you have to take responsibility to use it, right?
Yeah.
You have to stand up, and in the gates, that means publicly in front of a large group of people, because there were always groups of people at the gate. So you have to stand up in public in front of a large group and say, I have done this, and then you can do it.
Yeah.
Well, don't they get to okay you, right?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
says that somewhere in here.
I feel like they're allowed to turn you away if they're
It
like,
says-
oh, that's not accidental enough.
Oh,
It says they shall admit him into the
Yeah, it
city.
doesn't say they have to.
Wow, shall, that's.
Yeah, I think shall is, it's reading more into it, it's just that it's in the future tense in the Bible, which it doesn't really mean anything, because tenses don't even function the way they function in English or modern Hebrew.
But it's not a commandment, I mean, it's.
No.
It's commandment.
It's just, this is how it works. You
Yeah.
accidentally kill someone, it's
Yeah.
definitely accidental. You say it publicly, then they let you into the city of refuge, and then you're safe, and after the high priest sign, then you're allowed to leave. I guess if you want to. Yeah.
I was, when I was reading one of the commentaries on this,
Mhm.
it said that the reason why the death of the high priest was the place where he could go back is because the whole Israel, when the high priest died, they went into complete mourning, and it actually wiped out all the mourning of everything else.
So the
because
feeling
the
of hate
foreigners.
and anger were.
And everything was, what you call it, because they were so mourning of the high priest.
That's a great comment. You remember?
It was from, it was in the Daily Dose of Torah from, that,
Chabad, maybe?
it was from the publisher, did you?
Art
Oh,
Scroll.
Art,
Yeah, I
right.
have that, yeah, Art Scroll.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. That's a beautiful idea. I like that.
This also keeps the violence from spiraling out of control.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because if the blood avenger kills him, then there's a blood avenger from the other side.
Well, I encourage
That will wanna-
athletes out of this TV.
It's the Hatfield Report.
Yeah,
So that's sort of like the
it's
Jubilee.
like Pakistan or something.
Yeah.
Well, I was
That
thinking about
comes
how
up.
people take the tradition, whatever that is, of people taking refuge asylum in church, that it developed, I was just thinking about that from here. The town's after
Mhm.
them, so they go priest height.
You can still do that in Europe if the church has chains.
Well,
That church has.
They have to have like a special type of fence outside of it. But and it's usually just bigger cathedrals, but you can totally just still hide in there if you're criminal and they're like, whoa.
Wow.
Well, that comes literally. There was a time during the Dark Ages when the church was a primary form of government in a lot of regions.
Yeah.
Cathedral comes from the Latin word for throne, and so a lot of times the ruling bishop's word was law in the outlying areas. So it was literally seeking sanctuary from the court, again, legal protected custody in there.
In the church.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to a secondary type of special residency. Let's say this is now 21, verse 1. Nell, you want to read for us?
The heads of the Levite families approached Eleazar the priest and Joshua son of Nun, and the heads of the families of the tribes of Israel. They came before them at Shiloh in Canaan and said, "The Lord gave this command to Moses that we were to receive towns to live in, together with the common land belonging to them for our cattle." The Israelites therefore, in obedience to the Lord's command, assigned to the Levites out of their own holdings the following towns with their common land. When lots were cast, the first fell to the Kohathites family, those Levites who were descended from Aaron the priest received 13 towns chosen by lot from the tribes of Judah, Simeon, and Benjamin. The rest of the Kohathites were allotted family by family 10 towns from the tribes of Ephraim, Dan, and half Manasseh. The Gershonites were allotted family by family 13 towns from the tribes of Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, and the half-tribe of Manasseh and Bashan. The Merarites were allotted family by family 12 towns from the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and Zebulun. So the Israelites gave the Levites these towns with their common land, allocating them by lot as the Lord had commanded through Moses. The Israelites designated the following towns of the tribe of Judah and Simeon. For those sons of Aaron who were of the Kohathite families of the Levites, because their lot came out first. They gave them Kiryat Arba, Arba was the father of Anak, that is Hebron, in the hill country of Judah, and the common land around it. But they gave the open country near the town and its hamlet of Caleb, son of Jephunneh, as his holding. To the son of Aaron, the priest, they gave Hebron, city of refuge for the homicide, Lebna, Jatir, Estimoa, Halan, Debir, Ashan, Judah, Beth Shemesh, each with its common land. 9 towns from these 2 tribes. They also gave towns from the tribe of Benjamin, Gideon, Geba, Anathot, and Alman, each with its common land, 4 towns. The number of the towns with their common land given to the sons of Aaron the priests was 13. The towns which the rest of the Kohathite family of the Levites received by lot were from the tribe of Ephraim. They gave them Shechem, city of refuge for the homicide in the hill country of Ephraim, Jezer, Kibzaim, Beth Haran, each with its common land, 4 towns from the tribe of Dan. They gave them El Gebeton, Aijion, and Gath Limon, each with its common land, 4
Okay.
towns.
I'm going to stop you because basically it goes from, these 3 families, the Kohathite families, and then the Gershonites, and then the Merarites. And so that ends, there are 12 towns, all the Levite towns within the holding of Bnei Israel, 48 towns, this is verse 41, 48 towns with their common land surrounding these towns. These towns had each its own common land surrounding it, so it was for all these towns. So in other words, it's not only the town itself, it's also the surrounding farmland and the livestock, pastures, and everything else.
So I have a question, because these are the.
Well, let me just finish the rest of this. So Joshua finished the distribution of the land within its boundaries. The Bnei Israel gave a section to Joshua according to the decision of Adonai. They gave him the town he asked for. They gave him Timnath Serah in the hill country of Ephraim. Joshua rebuilt the town, and there he settled. He took the flint knives with which he circumcised Bnei Israel, who came out of the wilderness, and he deposited them in Timnath Serah. So he still kept those knives. Very sentimental, I can only imagine. So there we go. Next time.
Levites lived in their own towns.
And their own towns spread out through the entire area.
Is there a lot
Yeah.
of spot?
That way they could do services for, Levitical services for
And
everybody.
that's my question, because in Judges, we see local altars and stuff,
Yes.
as opposed to only servicing at the tabernacle or at the temple.
Right.
So they actually lived in these towns. These towns, it just wasn't, they all lived wherever the tabernacle or the temple was, and then these towns were responsible for feeding this group of Levite priests. Levite priests were actually in these towns.
They were in these towns, and they served, obviously, those towns, but they also served whatever was around them.
Yeah, and they had their own livestock, so they fed themselves.
And you were not, and you would go and bring your sacrifice to the priest, and they would take care of it. Even in Joshua, it's not totally centralized the way Deuteronomy sort of sets up. Everything is being in Jerusalem. Even in Joshua, you wouldn't put Levites everywhere if Levites only practiced in Jerusalem.
Right.
So Levites are everywhere because the Levites are going to practice, but it still conflicts with Judges because you have non-Levites making sacrifices to Adonai, and the sacrifices being received. If a non-Levite sacrificed to Adonai and then got leprosy in Judges, then that would fit Joshua just fine. But they don't get leprosy; their sacrifice gets received. One person actually becomes a household priest, and he wasn't even a Levite. And he basically becomes, what was the guy's name? Starts with an M. Michael or Malachi, or somebody. But this guy basically was traveling around, not a Levite, asks for work on the farm. And the guy says, well, you can do all the sacrifices that we need to have done. And so we did that, and he paid him and gave him some silver, and he built,
You got fired a little bit.
made an idol out of the silver. And then, when the other group came in and sacked that guy's farm because he was in this, I think it was the section of Dan that got conquered or something like that, the conquering group saw that he was a priest and said, well, you can just be a priest for us now. But the craziness of the story is that he wasn't Levi. You know, and the whole reason for all these Levi towns is exactly because you're supposed to use the Levites for sacrificing, but not necessarily in Jerusalem, in Joshua. Any other closing comments?
Closing question. But, and again, this is one about the meeting word, but it mentions, Bashan as a region. I can't help but think, of grammatical similarity to Bashan, Tova, Happy New Year. Does that mean the new territory in that dialect, or?
Shana actually means year, so it's probably not related. All right, so next time we are starting in 22. Yep.
Since there are board members here, there were all these phone calls that were going on yesterday, and the email came out this morning on where we were meeting, a lot of confusion. Maybe, I don't, it's just a suggestion that, I think probably Shannon sent out the ones, later on this morning. For some of us to get out of the room, in terms of where we're meeting for, tourist vendors seems to change around sometimes, maybe the notes can go out sooner.
We need to refine this for next year.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're here next time to store study, but then the time after that is to be announced.
Okay, that's
Where?
right.
Next time is here as well.
Next time is
And
here,
after that?
the 25th is to be announced, so.
Oh, to be announced.
Thank you.
I did, only if I have it.
Well, there's one house that
And I get up to the
actually, the sense from the judges.
I just was.
Oh, really?